Hello everyone and welcome to the month of July. Let's see what kind of computer we're building in this month's video. Before we get into it, I want to give a quick insight as to what we do for this series. We take your budget and answers from a request form. In the video description, there is a link to a Google form. It slowly gets updated every so often. With this information, we try to build the best computer we can to fit your means. Unless there are budget constraints, we spec out systems on AMD and Intel, both using their DDR4 and DDR5 Gen platforms. Once the build lists are complete, we compare each build using online benchmarks and list out the pros and cons between the top builds from the benchmarks. Using those, then we can determine what build is the best for your use case. But we can't do any of that without your input. Speaking of the Google form, let's see how you fill it out. Alright, in case you forgot or you're new to the channel, let's see we fill out our budget build request form. Budgets are in USD. We do not include taxes, fees, or Windows keys unless stated otherwise. We do not share your email address, so you don't have to worry about that. For type of system, we have gaming, working, or combination of the two. For form factor preferences of your motherboard, this will determine what case size we can go with. You can select mini ITX all the way to XL ATX, or you just have no preference. For CPU and GPU preferences, we have your Intel and AMD for CPU, NVIDIA AMD for GPU, no preferences for either, or you can select other and type in what you want. For areas of focus, we have your CPU, cooling, motherboard, memory, storage, graphics card, case, and power supply. Now I will be changing this out soon to be more hierarchical, so it'll show like 1, 2, 3, or 4, and so on, so we know which ones to focus on based on your priority. I will let you know the next time I do this change in the next video, so just stay tuned for that. Here we have already purchased our own system components. If you already have the PC parts from your previous build, or you just have already bought them, just let me know down in this answer here below. Just put it in the format of the component type and the general info. There's no sense into buying two computer cases. For peripherals, if you want or need any peripherals, just let me know here. And then you can either put the budget you want to add on to your total budget, or let me know here if you want to take a percentage of your budget and put it specifically for peripherals. And then lastly, we have any other request you have. You want RGB, no RGB, and again, any other final request you have. Quick disclaimer, prices will vary if any sales are going on or stock changes at the time of recording. Because of this, we tried to get the budget builds as close or slightly over the stated budget. Unless asked, we are not including taxes, shipping costs, OS keys, or peripherals in the final cost from the budget. Now, it doesn't seem like we have any other responses on the Google form besides the one from actually 2 months ago, but that's perfectly fine. As these responses come in, we'll continue working on them as we go. So let's just start with this one and see what we got. The user has a budget of $950 USD, wants a gaming system, form factor preference of ATX, wants an AMD GPU and AMD CPU, which does limit us when we're building these things out. Wants us to focus on their motherboard, their storage, their graphics card. Already has an 850 watt gold power supply, 16 gigabytes of DDR4, and doesn't care about RGB or no RGB. Before we go ahead and build out the user systems, here are the components that they already have. They have some 16 gig kit of DDR4, and they have some 850 watt gold power supply. I just picked these two Corsair components just so they are placeholders. Now, I know this says it's $160 total, but at the end, when we build out the systems, I will be either decrementing the total here or just removing their price from the overall total. Now, I would say that the DDR4 limits me to only the AM4 platform, but we're going to look into the AM5 platform as well, since, $950 USD is actually a pretty good budget to actually make a AM5 build. Now, the user did limit us to only an AMD CPU and AMD GPU, so we're only going to build an AM4 build and then an AM5 build. Now they want us to focus on the motherboard, the storage, and the graphics card, but in a gaming system, we're going to have a little beefier CPU as well. So without further ado and any more delay, let's get into our builds. Alright, our first AM4 build went with the Ryzen 7 5700G. It's an 8-core, 16-thread, 3.8 GHz boosting to 4.6. For the motherboard, we focused on this a lot more because that's what the user wanted. We went with the Asus ROG Strix. This is a B550-E motherboard that comes with actually a lot of things. 3 PCIe 16 slots, 2 PCIe 1X slots, 2 M.2 slots, 6 SATA 6.0 slots, a 2.5 gig LAN, 2 USB 2 headers, 1 USB 3.2 Gen 1 header, and 1 USB 3.2 Gen 2 header. Of course, Wi-Fi 6 networking. I mean, they didn't care about RGB, so it has RGB as well. We went with a 4TB Seagate hard drive. The user said they wanted us to focus on storage as well, and since you're going to be using this as gaming, might as well not take up that precious SSD storage with just random files. And then for an SSD, we went with the Crucial P3 Plus. This is a 2TB PCIe 4.0x4 SSD. For a graphics card, we went with the RX 6750 XT. And then we went with a generic case, and then that same placeholder power supply of 850 watts. For a nice budget of 933 USD, so we're sitting right below that budget. Now if we move things around a little bit, we have that same CPU and motherboard as before, placeholder RAM. This time we dropped to only that 2TB PCIe SSD. And then for a graphics card, we went with an RX 7700 XT, which is a 12GB card. And then everything else pretty much stays the same. Now before we move on to AM5, I will be comparing our graphics cards since our CPUs pretty much stayed the same. So let's go check that out.
So, what's this going to run?
If there are no other surprises, mid 5 figures.
5 figures?
Alright, we can see that our RX 7700 XT is our clear winner for our graphics card. Now I would actually suggest doing this build without that hard drive because you can actually just get, again, more storage later on and don't have to worry about buying a whole new graphics card. So user, the choice is up to you, but right as this moment, I would suggest doing this build, the Ryzen 7 5700G, that motherboard, your RAM that you already have, an SSD, that graphics card. Just any case, you don't even have to get this one, you can get whatever you want because we actually have $30 more left in that budget, and then an 850 watt gold power supply which you already own. Now if we just take a little trip over to the AM5 platform, let's see what we can build out with that. Alrighty, and just a reminder that we are just taking the power supply since we're moving on to DDR5 RAM. So let's check out what we can get for AM5. And then to take a look at our AM5 builds. Now, just a quick side note here, I only built one of these and not two to compare to, so we're only going to take a look at this one. We went with the Ryzen 5 8500G, it's a 6-core, 12-thread, 4.1 GHz boosting to 5.0. For our motherboard, we went with the MSI X670E. It does have Wi-Fi and supports a lot more than our AM4 board does, such as 4 M.2 slots, 1 2230E key, and then the same PCIe slots. Scroll down, it does have less SATA slots, does have the same 2.5 gig Ethernet and other stuff. It does have Wi-Fi 6E though. After our CPU test, we will be doing a side-by-side comparison between the two motherboards, so just stay tuned for that. Moving on to our RAM, we went with the Team Group T-Create Expert. It's a 32 gig kit of DDR5 6000 CL30. For our storage, we went with that same P3 Plus 2TB from before, but we also added a 500 GB internal hard drive. Again, this is just for random files. If you're using this mostly for gaming, then you don't want to take up SSD storage for that. For a graphics card, we're with an 8GB RX 7600, and then that same generic case from before, and then of course our power supply. And we're sitting right underneath that $950 budget. So now let's take our CPUs, compare them so we can see which CPU build we should go for, and then we're going to test out our graphics card and our motherboards, and then finalize our build. And here are our CPU comparison. This is for our DDR4 and our DDR5. So to compare our two CPUs, this one has 8 cores, this one has 6 cores. And if we just keep looking, we can see that the Ryzen 7 5700G is actually better off than the Ryzen 5 8500G. So CPU scores alone, we're going to go with our DDR4 build on our AM4 platform. Now that we know our top CPU is our Ryzen 7 5700G, there actually is no sense into comparing motherboards. If they were similar in CPU comparison, then I would say let's look at motherboards, but that's actually it. We already covered our video card comparison with our AM4 builds. I mean, we could try to move something around, but there's nothing else we can do for this. So that means, user, this is the build you should go for. Just a quick side note here, you do have to do a BIOS update for the motherboard to support the CPU, but that's about it. This leaves you in a great spot because you can always add storage on without having to buy a new graphics card, as well as you can upgrade your CPU down the line and you don't have to worry about your motherboard. Now, as much as I would say because you're building a fresh system to go AM5, honestly, the choice is up to yours. Both of these builds will be down in the description below or on my account on PC Part Picker. So thank you so much for watching. Hopefully our build spec here actually answered your question that you had with the Google form. And like if you like, dislike if you dislike it, fill out that Google form, and I'll see you all in the next one.